Welcome back. This is our last lecture is on globalization, and I put a bunch of food cartoons on here because, like languages, food is also something that's very global that's spread throughout the world. So we'll be talking about um, what are the languages, top spoken languages, what are the languages able to survive, what are the languages that are being learned right now in a global setting, and then we'll talk about the presence of English, especially varieties of English such as Singlish, which is the variety spoken in Singapore. So in the article that it mentioned this week that when you try to capture speakers in a area, and you try to say, okay, what language do you speak? Obviously, this is complicated. We've learned throughout the course about mutual intelligibility. One speaker of a language may not understand another speaker of quote unquote the same language. We found this to be true with Shanghainese versus Taiwanese versus Cantonese and varieties of Chinese. We also found the opposite to be true, where um, some varieties of a language are determined to be different languages or different varieties, but in actuality, they are very similar. So we saw this also with Hindi and Urdu. We saw this with Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, and then we also saw this with Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish. So there's some problems when it comes to capturing what speakers actually speak. There's practical difficulties, right, in order to go into a community because language changes all the time. What are the languages being spoken in really remote parts of the world? Political difficulties because, as we've seen before, some languages are dictated to be a certain way when in actuality and linguistically it's very similar. Theoretical difficulties, as far as some languages are uh, theoretically it might be Indo-European, but you might have a language isolate. You might have Hungarian, for example, which is very different from, even though it's located in Europe, it's very different from all the other European languages. And that's also historical difficulties of determining what is this language versus another. So how does like German with its Germanic roots differ from the German today? There's also other problems as far as what people use as their first and second language. So in the United States, we have a census. We have an American Community Data Survey that is part of the census that they do every 10 years. But they ask people, what language do you speak at home? And so this can be confusing for a lot of folks because, for example, I would list Chinese because I speak Chinese to my mom. But if you were able to record, what language I actually speak, we probably speak more in English than we do in Chinese. So people might list something, but it might turn out to be, in reality, something different. So this is kind of the drawback of using self-reported data. So the census data is really questionable. It does say, the last census data in 2014 did say that 1 out of every 5 people speak a different language at home. But of course, where are these varieties? Like they're not really clean cut because a family might speak Spanglish, right? They might speak a mixture of Spanish and English, and it's hard to choose which language is your first and which language is your second because maybe you're truly bilingual. So, this is the number of speakers, the top 20 languages that are spoken in the world today. And so they're trying to capture native speakers versus total number of speakers. It also lists like, okay, these are family languages that can be divided into distinct languages. So they're trying to group a lot of languages together. So what we notice here is that obviously Mandarin Chinese is the number one most spoken language. Um, but English is very interesting to look at because English, even though it's the second most widely spoken language in the world, it's not the language that's being spoken by its primary speakers. It's mostly being spoken by people learning it as a second or third language or fourth language, as an additional language, right? So that's very interesting to look at. You have Spanish here, French, Arabic, Russian, Hindi, Bengali, um, and so, just from the sheer number of people, right? Because China has a lot of people, India has a lot of people, Bangladesh has a lot of people. So you're going to get a lot of speakers. And then further down the list, you'll find Portuguese, Punjabi, German, Japanese, Italian, Javanese from Indonesia, Telugu, Tamil, so other families spoken in India, Korean, Malay, Marathi, Vietnamese, Turkish, Urdu, Persian. And as far as the proportion of secondary speakers, you have French. So more people speak French as a second language than they do as a first language. And that makes sense from the history of French colonialism. Same thing for English, Punjabi, German, Russian, Bengali, Hindi, Italian, Spanish, Chinese, Portuguese, Japanese, Arabic. So these are folks who are maybe using it as a lingua franca. They're using French as a lingua franca, they're using English as a lingua franca. You're less likely to use Chinese as a lingua franca unless you already. I think it's mostly if you're not located in China. This 0.15% might be people who um, maybe are from other Chinese speaking populations, like in Malaysia and Singapore and Hong Kong, for example. So very interesting to see how languages stack up. What is it that people are speaking right now? So through population, right? Like you can have a sheer number of speakers just by the fact that you have a big population. But it could also include encroachment on neighboring areas. So parts of Japan are learning, Chinese as a second language, Korean as a second language. But also, these are organic factors. So that means that, no one came in and said, you must learn this language. Um, languages come about as a form of sometimes organic growth, right? The fact that it has a stable crop. So for example, because a lot of these countries in the top 10 are from Asia, it's because rice, for example, was such a stable crop and it allowed for a lot of fertilization, which allowed for a booming population. You have a centralized authority. You have like a government saying, okay, we'll all learn this language, um, together, and you kind of squash out other varieties. Or People agree, like, okay, we're going to use a centralized language. And it can be geographical location. The article talks about it pays to be in Asia. It pays to be in Southeast Asia. It pays to be in a location where you're not necessarily having these different languages, different neighbors, um, you know, who are maybe more far apart because compare Europe, for example. You drive an hour outside of a country in Europe and you speak a different language. Whereas if you're in China, you drive an hour in China, you're still in China. You drive an hour in Russia, you're still in Russia. So the geographical location can also impact, the languages that you speak. And then other countries, for example, Turkic languages, they're necessarily, the countries themselves aren't necessarily part of Turkey. Um, but, in Turkey languages like Azerbaijani, Azeri, they're able to kind of, use similar languages that have kind of a very similar language family. So, this kind of globalization spreads a language to discontinuous areas of the world. So, of course, if languages aren't being learned organically, the opposite is that they're being forced to learn by mergers or acquisitions. The article kind of posed it as a very like a business sense, right? Like, oh, if we were able to merge these two companies, merge these two countries, when the reality is a lot of death and war and famine and displacement and refugees, right? So colonialism, annexations, wars, these are people, or these are instances in which people are forced to learn a language. And we saw this in the case with Brazil, with Brazilian Portuguese. We saw this in the case with Spanish colonization. We saw this in the slave trade, where people were forced to learn a French type of language or English type of language, or just through colonialism. So, as a result, languages die. We talked about this on day one, whereas before the European invasion, there were 20 million Native Americans, each speaking 300 languages. Whereas today we have 2 million Native Americans who speak 175 languages, and of these 175, 55 have less than 5 speakers. So, when a language dies is when a speaker dies because they take the language with it. So it's virtually extinct. There's also 100 languages that are endangered, and linguists calculate that maybe 20 might survive. But as we've noticed, that for a language to survive, it has to be spoken by the children. So the children may or may not speak it based on other, very varying factors. Like, do they have access to schools? Do they have access to materials? What is the wealth of this language in the economy, if we're going to use economic terms. The same thing for Australia. Before European invasion, there were a million indigenous Australians with 450 languages. 200 languages survive. All are endangered, and 20 of those languages are spoken by children. So, again, very similar to North America. Just the impact of invasion, impact of colonialization, impact of war. So, as I said before, the growth of the languages in China or India are stable or rising. I do not see Chinese going away. I do not see languages in India going away. Um, what about Arabic? Arabic and African languages are growing due to a rise in birth rates. So just like the number of population will continue to grow, and they will continue to learn these African languages. European languages such as German and Italian are in a fragile state. That doesn't mean that they're going to go away in the next generation. But you have to think about the number of speakers, right? Because, German and Italian, because they, haven't had this like the same history as maybe France and England as far as colonization. With German, there's a lot of people who migrate to Germany, and they're learning German, so they're really resting on kind of this like immigration, and more people moving into Germany that are picking up the language. Italian is something that's because the Roman Empire has ruled for like thousands of years, just until like 500 AD. You're gonna have Italian, but Italy, as far as like a united country, hasn't been the shape of Italy, has been through a lot of different reconfigurations. And so Italian is, it's also, might be declining, not in the near future, but it's thinking about, okay, so it has a large staying power due to its history, due to the fact that the Roman Empire just was so expansive, due to the fact that it's a Romance language. But in predicting the future, where will Italian go? Linguists are not sure. Russian is declining, even though it has a big population, just because, it could be political. A lot of people are, instead of learning Russian, are actually learning English. So, you think about the young people and like the media they consume, and what languages they are learning, what are the trends. French, it's hard to predict. English, it's hard to predict because they are vehicles of globalizations and lingua francas for a lot of areas. So in lieu of a shared language, people will speak English or French. And so the future of these languages are hard to predict. Language spread depends on community growth. So how much the community grows. Obviously, it's never simply about the language. It's a lot to do with its history, its culture. The language that's being adopted is the people are able to take it in, their own way. And we'll see this with Singlish in a little bit, but just the fact that like British English is different than American English is different than Australian English. And language diversity is not a liability for mankind, right? The more diverse the languages are, the more that civilizations and populations are able to thrive. So, if we're able to reconceptualize global in a local term, we all aspire to live globally. People say that, the world today is very global. You're able to reach out through social media, through all these different networks. You're able to have more of a connection to, into international means than you did before. But everyone comes from a local heritage. So those local heritages are important, right? So even if, for example, English is a global language, the Englishes that you have are immersed into local context. So now scholars would say, based on the model of Kashrut, that Englishes that we have not one standard of English. So the chart that shows English isn't necessarily representative of the varieties of Englishes that we have. So there's Indian Englishes, there's Australian Englishes, there's Singlish, right? So there's many varieties of Englishes, and we should stop thinking about English as one entity. The substrate may also interfere with the second language. So the substrate would be the varieties of the local people. And so they kind of put their own spin on it. They create these new varieties, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But just the impact of globalization, like I showed pictures of food. If you go around the world, you know that people either love or hate McDonald's, but it is all over the world, and they try to fit this concept of McDonald's, this fast food concept, to places all over the world. So, for example, in France, you have the Royal. In Morocco, you have the McArabia. Canada, you have poutine, the fantastic in China, and so this is kind of a symbol for globalization as well. Like you take a language that's been spread all over the world, and then you kind of make it your own, right? You're able to take the best parts of the language, and then the best parts of the local culture, and combine them together. So let's talk a little bit more about Singaporean English or Singlish. And so if you've never been to Singapore, Singapore is at the very tip of Asia. It's actually of continental Asia. And it's an island state, and it used to be ruled by the British. So we'll talk a little bit about the history, vocabulary. I'm not going to talk about a little bit about pronunciation, but we're going to look at grammar and discourse particles. So, British colonial rule over Singapore. So, they had, a military, I think his name was Raffles, who came and colonized Singapore, and they ruled for almost 150 years. And so then Singapore decided to declare independence in 1965. But because it had this long-term English rule, the English that they speak is very different. It's able to take a life of its own, leading to development of modern day standard Singapore English. So standard Singapore English began to take root, and Singlish began to evolve among the working classes who learned English without formal schooling. So, Singlish today, if you were able to go to Singapore, they would say that it's spoken by like the common people, that, it's not the people who are aristocrats who are speaking Singlish, because it really is, they're learning standard British English or received pronunciation. But Singlish kind of comes like it has a life of its own. So the pronunciation is built on a base of British English, but is heavily influenced by native Malay from Malaysia, Hokkien and Cantonese varieties from China. So there are variations within Singlish, both geographically and ethnically. because it's just a very diverse state. There's four official languages. There's English, there's Chinese, there's Malay, and there's Tamil. And so you have this ethnic composition of people from very distinct parts of Asia, and other ethnic groups that have kind of put their own imprint on Singlish. So it uses many of these words borrowed from Hokkien, the Chinese dialect native to like 75% of Chinese in Singapore, and then from Malay. So most of the people are from Chinese descent. Um, in many cases, English words take on the meaning of their Chinese counterparts, resulting in a shifted meaning. So it can, for example, the Indian words for die, meaning hey, or gundu, meaning idiot. It's able to take those words and make it its own. So, for example, makam, it comes from Malay. It means like, to resemble something. Step, acting as if a person is acting as if don't step bang, right? Don't act as if you're bang. Toot is a stupid or silly person. I feel like that's British root. Send, to bring someone somewhere. I will send you to the airport, probably a British root. uh World, nonsense, bullshit. Share, it's a corruption of teacher. And then girl is a corruption of girl, so instead of saying girl, they'll say girl. The grammar of Singlish is heavily influenced by other languages and dialects. In For example, Singlish is very topic prominent. So I'm sure some of you who are learning Chinese or learning Japanese, topic prominence means that the way that people speak, they start with the topic, right? So this is like the reference of the conversation. They establish a topic and then they follow it by a comment or by new information. So compared to other varieties of English, this semantic relationship between topic and comment is not important. Moreover, nouns, verbs, adverbs, and even entire subject verb object phrases can serve as the topic. So to give you an example, they'll say, this country weather very hot one. This country weather very hot one means the weather is very warm in this country, right? But you want to establish, okay, I'm talking about this country, right? And then you talk about new information. Another example, that joker there cannot trust. You cannot trust that person over there. I like that they use joker for a person. That's very English, or that's very Singlish. Tomorrow don't need bring camera. So you don't need to bring a camera tomorrow. He played football. Also very good one, Lei. He's very good at playing football too. Um, so another discourse marker, which I'll talk about, is the forms of lei. So they'll use lei or la at the very end of the sentence, which is comes from the Asian influences. So the copula, anytime linguists mention a copula, it just means the to be verb is treated kind of differently. So, for example, when it's occurring with an adjective or adjective phrase, the verb to be tends to be omitted. So instead of saying he is naughty, he said, oh, he damn naughty. He damn naughty. So the is or are is omitted here. Sometimes an adverb such as very occurs. So this is kind of coming from Chinese again, from hen or hao, which is like very good. So this house is very nice. This house is very nice. Right. So it to me it kind of feels like someone is talking in an Asian accent, but it's actually their variety of English. Singlish is English but with Asian influences. Um, so it's also common for to be omitted before the present participle. So I still finding. How come you so late still playing music? Ah, so instead of like I am still finding, or how come you are so late? How come you so late? So to they don't have to be is are. And then slightly less common, but sometimes speakers will drop to be when it's used as a locative. So this is like when you're equating something to something else. Like, this lady is his wife. They would say, that one his wife la. So again, there's use of la or lay as a discourse marker. Negation is very interesting in Singlish. It works like English. With, if you're able to negate something, you say like, I do not have, or I am not there, or I don't like this, right? So you use contractions. You shouldn't do this. You can't do this, are used alongside their uncontracted forms. But because in Singlish you have a final cluster simplification, they don't pronounce the T. So the T drops out of all negative forms. And because of this, because they don't have a T, they don't have a final cluster. Then it leads to nasalizing the previous vowel in order to form negation. This makes nasalization the only mark of the negative. So instead of saying I don't want to, they said I don't want. I don't want, right? And so how are you able to tell? Because they didn't say I don't, right? They didn't say the T there. But you can tell because they nasalized the vowel. So they said I don't want instead of like I do want, right? So that's the only way you can tell in this instance. Another effect of this is in the verb can, is positive or negative, like when it's written down. I can do this la. I can do this la. I can do this, which is a positive. If you can't do it, it's I can't do this la. I can do this la versus I can't do this la. So one is can, one is can't. But again, they don't have the final cluster T. So the only way you can figure it out is by the vowel. Can versus can. Interrogatives, forming questions. So one way they're able to form questions is using a construction similar to Chinese, right? Because it has a strong Chinese influence. So they're able to use or not to form yes or no questions. So you want this book or not? You want this book? You can or not, right? So this might sound a little, for native English monolingual speakers, it can sound a little aggressive. You want this book or not, right? But they're actually asking you like, hey, do you want this book? I'm trying to form a yes no question here, right? Like I need a yes no answer. Is it, right? Also forms yes no questions. They never study is it. You don't like that, is it? Right? So this like is their way of forming a question that necessitates a yes or no response. So it's very interesting, especially talking about the influences of Mandarin in the future. This is kind of like a marriage between Mandarin and English. So, because Mandarin has such a stronghold, it's the number one language being spoken in the world right now. Will this have an influence on English in the future? An example of reduplication. So reduplication just means that you're saying the same word twice. This is very common in Creoles, pidgins and Creoles. So another feature strongly reminiscent of Chinese and Malay is when verbs are repeated. So there's a TV personality, Pua Chu Kong, who says, don't pray. And so pray in this instance means play, means like don't play. And they're able to repeat it for emphasis. So the verbs are repeated to indicate the delimitative aspect that the action goes on for a short period. And they repeat it 3 times to indicate greater length and continuity. Go ting ting a little bit. Maybe then you get answer. So go think it over for a while and then you might understand. Or so what I do is I sit down and I ting 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 until I get answer, lore. So this is so I sat down, thought until I understood. Okay. So they're able to repeat things to show that this is a moment of time. It's an ongoing recursive action, and it shows you how long that they are able to think of this action. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Oops. Um, the use of verb repetition also serves as a more vivid description of as an activity. So they'll say, "Wanna go orchard, walk, see or not?" Like, let's go shopping, sightseeing on Orchard Road. Done anyhow, touch here, touch there, lay. Don't mess with any of my things. So, again, this Chinese influence and nouns referring to people can be repeated for intimacy. Um, but most commonly, it's the ones that are monosyllabic. Okay, so you're not going to get repetitions of any nouns that are more than one syllable. For example, my boy is going to primary one already. So my son is going to enter year one. They use the British style. We two friend once. One. So it means like we are close friends. Right. So again, this is it does have this kind of pidgin or Creole feel to it, but Singlish is something that's that's being spoken by the native population, right? So it's being spoken by the youth, spoken by a lot of people, even though the government is trying to crack down on Singlish. La, like I mentioned, la is a discourse particle. So when you're speaking, they're able to use la as kind of a way to, end the sentence or, you know, state a position or like it's asking like, oh, you agree, right? So it can be used within a lot of different varieties. It can be used with imperatives like drink la. It can be used with negative responses. You don't know this one la. Or used for reassurance. It's okay la. So, right. So this is when they use law, it means like they're trying to encourage, they're agreeing with you. They're trying to maintain a strong social connection to you. So this is their version of law. Ma is used to assert something that is obvious or final and is usually used with statements that are already patently true. It can also be used to correct or cajole someone. This might seem condescending to the listener, but he very good at sports. That's why he can play soccer, ma. So, yeah. So if you ever go to Singapore, I really encourage you to use these varieties because I think it's very interesting. But also from a non-native speaker perspective, when to use law and when to use ma. Because there's different, it's very idiosyncratic to the language. Oi is something that's not unique to Singlish. Oi is used in a lot of different contexts, such as in a lot of Jewish, a lot of Hebrew, Yiddish, right? They'll use oi. So in this case, it's originating from the Hokkien, but is used in Singlish, as is other English varieties, to draw indignation or express surprise or draw attention. Oi, you forgot to give me my pencil. Or oi, hear me can. Um, so in Australian English, they also use this. So because of the geography, there's a lot of people from Singapore to actually study abroad in Australia to learn English. And so they come back with like these Australian influences. And so sometimes they'll use oi. What? What is sometimes spelled as what is used to remind or contradict the listener, especially when strengthening another assertion that follows from the current one. But he very good at sports. What? But he is very good at sports. Shouldn't you know this already? Like it's gonna give you a context. So this is what these discourse particles do. It's not necessarily like they have a meaning that's more pragmatic. That kind of shows you like the conversation, shows you the social distance between the two speakers. You should already know that. What? You never give me what? It's not my fault since you didn't give it to me. Or oh, this is someone sorry, that's someone else's dialogue. So you never give me what? It's like someone emphasizing like that you have never given me this. So again, this is very it's like questioning, I guess, the speaker or contradicting the speaker. um I think we should use this in regular standard English. It sounds great. So your discussion questions this week, Mandarin Chinese already has the most speakers of any language, and China may soon pass the United States as the world economy. Will Mandarin English replace English as will Mandarin Chinese replace English as the global language? Number two, how would you feel if English was no longer the world's lingua franca? Number three, in what ways is Singlish like English? In what ways is it more like its Asian influenced languages? Do you feel like Singlish will be the language of the future, marrying kind of in between Mandarin and English? And then also, where do you see the future of the English language? How has it changed in recent years? Don't forget your final paper. I've checked some of your responses via email. If you haven't done so, please email me. It is due to last day of class. Please check the syllabus for more information. Obviously, if you've already have your topic, you're researching your topic, you want to send me a draft, that's totally fine as well. I love to read your drafts. I love to, you know, look at what you're thinking, look at, your thoughts. So don't forget to do the discussion board this week, and I will see you later.